We're going to begin with Assemblywoman Crystal Peoples-Stokes, who has faithfully served New York State's 141st Assembly District since 2003. She's a tireless fighter for diversity, specifically in making sure minority and women-owned businesses have a fair chance in obtaining state contracts. Beyond diversity and MWBEs, her passions include education and healthcare. She is a former educator, administrator, community organizer, and Erie County legislator. So without further ado, it is my privilege to welcome Assemblymember Crystal Peoples-Stokes to the stage.
Good morning. How's everybody doing? Good. I see folks are chewing. It's a little hard to respond when your mouth is going up. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here this morning. I want to thank Lou Jean and all the folks who organized this wonderful initiative, which I think this is about my 4th or 5th year having the opportunity to speak to you young fellows. But it's one that I relish, because I actually know for a fact that you all are going to be the ones that carry me into my older age. You're going to be the leaders. You're going to be the future leaders. And to have the opportunity to speak to you now while you're preparing yourself, I think is helpful to me. All of the work that I do is in the interest of making sure that there's some people who follow me who can carry things on, not just in their own self-interest, but in the interest of all people. I won't say New Yorkers, I say all people. As you heard in my bio, I actually have, in my former life, been an organizer. I organized around issues that were important to people. And as an organizer, I worked with Citizen Action of New York, which, at that time, that organization was really focused on healthcare and making healthcare a single-payer system. That was in the late 90s. We're still not there yet. But we're getting closer, and we're getting closer. And I think at the end of the day, like most things in government, things are going to be evaluated whether, how they impact people's lives and how do they impact the bottom line, which is the availability of tax dollars to be used on it. So I think for me today, I want to talk a little bit about the big idea of social justice. I think it actually ends up costing America a lot more money to allow racist institutions and racist ways to permeate our society. It leaves communities disenfranchised. It leaves people unable and unprepared to be contributing citizens. And so I've spent, at least a significant part of my public service life working on minority and women-owned business issues. And, I'll tell you how I got there. I was a member of the Erie County legislature, and I was not on the Economic Development Committee, but I went to a committee meeting one day just because I wanted to see what was going on in there. And my colleague, Mike Fitzpatrick, who was a former iron worker, he was the chair of that committee from South Buffalo, tough guy. I had an enormous amount of respect for him. I walked into the meeting, I sat down at the table with the rest of the members of the legislature and looked at the agenda, and the first thing on the agenda was to call in a company to find out why they kept having change orders. They put in a bid to do road work, and they always won the bid because they put the lowest bid in. But then during the course of the project, they changed the order several times. And so at the end of the day, it ended up costing more for the county to hire them than it would have had they hired another company that had submitted a bid. And so Mike Fitzpatrick and the Economic Development Committee wanted to know, why is that persistently happening? What are you all doing? Are you intentionally saying that you're going to be the lowest bid and then putting in these change orders during the course of the project, or is this something that we should maybe restructure how we put the bid out? Well, this company that came in, they were pissed. They were, how dare you call us in here to ask us about our job? This is our job. This is our contract. We always have this contract. And they didn't just come in with the president of the company. I think they had the grandmother and the mother and the sister and the brother. And a light bulb went off for me. Like, wow, is this how this works? Government has to do business with somebody? And it was a good light bulb because it made me realize that some people say government should work more like a business, should be more like a business. No, it really shouldn't, because the purpose of government is to serve people, first and foremost. But in order to do that, you do have to do business with a lot of people. And so if you got to do business with a lot of people, why don't you do it with all of the people? Instead of just a company like the one that came in and thought they had some ownership over this contract to do this road work. And so from that point on, I started working on minority and women-owned business opportunities. And quite frankly, it has changed the dynamic, not just in Erie County, but it has changed the dynamic in the state of New York as well. It's because when minorities are able to get contracts to do business for government, then they're able to grow, maintain, and stabilize their business just like other businesses have had the opportunity to do. When women are able to get contracts to provide a service for government, they're able to do the exact same thing, grow, maintain, and stabilize a business that then allows them to take better care of their families, better care of their communities. And generally, when minorities have businesses, they tend to hire minorities. And likewise with women, you'll take care of people who you know, and there's nothing wrong with that. Some people call it nepotism. I call it it's what happens. It's the way of life. I can see the benefits of that work, and I'm grateful for it. In Erie County, we passed a bill. The county of Erie, I think, was, I want to say, doing business with women-owned entrepreneurs at probably like about 1%. And when we passed the legislation to require them to increase it, that went up exponentially higher. And so there are women now in business. I don't know them. I quite frankly, don't even know the minorities, but that's not the point. The point is you got to make it accessible to everybody. And so when I got to the state government, Section 15A, which is a law that was put in place by the first Cuomo, Mario Cuomo, and it basically says that, you know, when the state does business, they would like to make sure that it does some business with minorities and some business with women. That was about to expire because the law was put in place to sunset. Oftentimes, laws that people don't really like or want to see how they work or want to kind of measure if it's workable, they put a sunset on it. So it's only going to last 5 years. Let's see how it worked. If it worked well, we'll do it again. Well, this one was about the sunset, and it really wasn't a desire to necessarily see it reauthorized. At the time, the governor was Pataki. And so it was incumbent upon, I think, myself and people in, the state assembly and the state senate to push the issue to make sure that this got reauthorized. And so I asked the then Speaker Sheldon Silver, she said, why is there no committee that specifically works on this issue? Said, well, Crystal, maybe there should be one. I said, well, yes. Why don't we do it? Why don't we set up a standing subcommittee of MWBE issues? And so Speaker Silver did do that, and not only did he do it, but he made me the chairperson of it, which means I had to switch my committee from consumer affairs to government operations, because government operations is the committee that deals with all executive law issues and all procurement issues. I wasn't too excited about that because I was calling myself an advocate for consumers. I needed to be on that committee. But I switched it and I got on the Government Operations Committee. Just goes to show you how sometimes things will happen in your life that put you in new positions where you should be. Now I actually chair the Government Operations Committee, which is one of the largest committees of the state legislature. It not only deals with procurement and all executive law, but it also deals with Homeland Security, state troopers, domestic violence issues, human rights issues. And so it's a giant committee that causes me to do a lot of work that I think is important to the quality of life of people. So step aside from MWB issues, my next big focus is with social justice as it relates to criminal justice reform. So I carry a bill that will literally seal the records of anyone who was convicted of low-level marijuana crimes and have done their time. I think it's already a law. The lawyers in the room would know this for sure, like my colleague Sean Ryan, that after 3 years, you can request to have your record sealed if you were convicted of low-level marijuana crimes. But how many people do that? One, you have to go get a lawyer that has to do that work for you. And two, I'm not so sure that it's a well-known fact that people tell you, oh, when you get sentenced, you're going to do this time, but after that, after 3 years, you can request to have your record sealed. I don't think that's well-known information. And I think because it's not well-known, and when you have a record and you have to say that on an application, it bars you from a lot of things. Like you can't get access to a Pell Grant if you've been convicted. You can't get access to public housing. As a matter of fact, you might get put out of public housing if you're convicted for low-level marijuana crimes. And so my bill would actually just eliminate that. You've done your time, that's it. It's sealed. Any application that you fill out, you don't have to say that, well, I was incarcerated for low-level marijuana crimes. You don't have to say that. You could literally turn your life around and make things available to you that were not available to you as a convicted person. And so I've been trying to pass that bill for a while. We've passed it in the Assembly on a regular basis. It has not passed in the Senate. And so 4 years ago, the state of New York finally, after many, many years, passed regulations and the governor signed it to set up the use of cannabis for medical purposes. We probably didn't do it the best way in New York, but we did get it. And so it's been changed a lot since then in order to meet the needs of the people that it was designed for. But in the process of that, we now have people who are using the same cannabis that some people have a record for. They're using it for medical purposes, and they're selling it through dispensaries. They're growing it, they're manufacturing it, and they're selling it legally for medical purposes. So another reason why a person who was convicted of low-level marijuana should not be still walking around with a record that bars them from being a full citizen. So we have also put that piece in the legislation that would legalize adult use of marijuana in the state of New York. The bill number is 3506. I would suggest that you all take a look at it. Read through it in detail. It has multiple facets, and one of them is the social justice piece. So if we never get the ceiling piece passed by both Assembly and Senate and signed by the governor before there's legalization in New York State, that piece of legislation includes the sealing of the record. So no one is actually bound by a criminal past with a product that we're now using on either a legal basis or a medical basis. I think it's an important, groundbreaking legislation. I'm sure you all, pay attention to the news and read all the articles on the number of states that have actually already legalized both adult use and medical use. Some states have done it really well. Some states have not done it so well. The thing that we have the opportunity to do in the state of New York is to look at what everybody else did. See, how did it work for you? What are the things that are important that we have included in our legislation when we get to it, and what are the things that are important to make sure that we don't have in it? One of the things that's real clear, and I think that most people would agree with this, is that under the medical marijuana, the governor set up a structure that required people who wanted to be the registered operators to do all three businesses. So the grow, the manufacturing, and the dispensary, which they had to pay a lot of money for that. I want to say it was like about $10,000 just to even apply. And only 5 of them got selected originally. Additional 5 have been added. There are a number of them who have not implemented even the first step of dispensary. There's one company that doesn't have a dispensary at all, yet there may be 2. And they have the capability of having 4. And so we can see that that's the wrong model. You don't want to do it that way. And so in the legal use bill, that is not included. Every license will be separate. And that does 2 things. One, that allows people who don't have access to $10,000 capital to apply for a license. It allows them to apply for a license at lower levels. So now there'll be 3 types of licenses. A separate license for growth, which will be very, very beneficial, I think, to upstate farmers. I know the hemp farming has already been very beneficial to upstate farmers because hemp is already legal in New York State. Hemp is a product that can be used for multiple things, not just rope, but clothes and paper and food, and you name it, hemp can be used for. So I think once we get to the legal point of it, the growing piece will be helpful to upstate farmers. You might note that there's some farmers who are already setting up like hydroponic growth buildings for tomatoes. Well, that's very good call. That puts them in a great position to be ready when we do get ready to go. And we are going to go there. I mean, some people are still a little hesitant about it. It may not be this year and it may not be next year, but it will be soon. The other part of it is the manufacturing. I have traveled the country. I've seen what other people do in their manufacturing industry. And they literally take these plants and strip them of everything, and they use different pieces for different things, whether it's medical or adult use. They pull the oil from it. They make edibles. There's all sorts of things that are made with the cannabis plant. And then the last part, of course, is dispensary. Just because there's those 3 businesses that can be licensed by the legislation that I carry, doesn't mean that there aren't other businesses around this opportunity to make cannabis legal or even medical. I had the pleasure, based on an invitation from former County Executive Joe DeAmber, some of you might know him, who works for a lobbying firm that's one of their biggest issues now is pushing this whole issue of legalization. But I went with him last year to Jacob Javits Convention Center in New York City, giant convention center. And there must have been at least 1,000 people who are already in business to deal with the issue of selling something that benefits the cannabis industry. And I raise that because it actually deals with two pieces of issues that are important to me. One, social justice, and two, investments and opportunity for people to be in business. And there's a lot of opportunity to make money around this industry. So our legislation, it calls for making sure that a certain percentage of the dollars that the state is able to earn through taxation, because it's going to be regulated and taxed, that a certain percentage of it has to be spent in communities that have been disenfranchised by mass incarceration. Now, that's real. I don't care which community you go in America, you could tell where the people where incarceration rates are high. You can tell by the condition of the education, you can tell by the condition of the housing, you can tell by the condition of the programs that are provided to the people who live in those communities. You can tell by how they're treated by institutions that are in our society, how they get the services that are different, same services, but delivered in a different way. You can tell that there has been institutional racism that have impacted these folks' lives. And so for me, again, this is about social justice. It's just not about all the money that we can make. It's about how do we invest the money to make sure that the people who have suffered from the mass incarceration have an opportunity to get a leg in on a society that's supposed to be great, and it can be great. That's going to be challenging, but that's doable. We've already kind of started some of these things in the state of New York through community schools. Community schools are the schools where you can't just say the kids are coming from poor homes or coming through crime-ridden neighborhoods. It's got to be the school that gives them everything they need when they get there. Not just for them, but for their families as well. Because if we don't take care of them now, we'll take care of them later in a different way, and it'll probably end up costing us more money. So I see the percentages of dollars that come from the taxing and regulating the cannabis going into community schools. Not into schools that already have everything they need. And there are some schools in Buffalo that have everything they need already. They do. They have everything they need, and there's some schools that don't. Those are the schools that we have to invest in, and I guarantee you, though, they're in the communities where the people live whose families have either been incarcerated or where there's a lot of crime and violence around it. We got to make critical investments in those communities. The last thing that I will say is that because there's so many business opportunities around this, you can't put MWBE goals on something like this, but you can create opportunities to encourage people to go into the business. And so on Thursday night, I was in Harlem, USA. And I was invited there by the Harlem Minority Business Alliance. The room was packed, and all the young people looked just like you all, except they were all people of color. They were, and talk about being ready, professional people, ready to go in business. I met an MBA who is already in business, and what does she do? She writes licensing applications for anybody who wants to apply anywhere in America where it's already legal to do a legal adult use or to do medical. She writes licenses for them. That's what she does. And she's doing very well at that. Now, she's doing so well with that already, and we only have about 10 states where it is illegal. Imagine how well she'll be doing. Imagine how many more people will be needed to do what she does by the time we get to 50 states, because we are going to 50 states. I can't tell you how soon that's going to happen, but I can be pretty sure that it will happen. Lastly, I will say this. My governor, our governor in the state of New York, Cuomo, was one of the people who did not like the use of marijuana being used at all. He didn't like medical. He fought hard against it, and when he got it set up, he set it up so stringent that we had to make a lot of changes since then, and we'll be making more. And he certainly did not like the thought of adult use. He said it was a gateway drug, and some people still do think it is a gateway drug. But I assure you that we've had at least 4 presidents that have smoked marijuana, and it wasn't a gateway drug for them. And it won't be a gateway drug for most people who don't have addictive tendencies. If you have that, you might have some issues. So, but our governor has finally got to the point where he understands that you got to take a look at this. And so he commissioned his health department to do a study. And more recently, the commissioner of the health department said they've completed their study. No one that I know have seen the results of that study yet, but they are saying that they're moving towards legalization. And so in some ways, I fully expect that in the 2019 budget, there probably will be some language in there in Article 7 about legalization of marijuana. In the process of getting there, though, I don't think that the governor and his health department are necessarily the wisest people to be setting up this process. I think they're going to need our input. And so I have gotten confirmation from the Speaker of the legislature, Speaker Hasty, that we're going to do 5 public hearings around the state of New York, maybe 6, before November, so that people can take a look at the existing legislation that I carry in the Assembly and Senator Liz Krueger from Manhattan carries in the Senate. To look at that, dissect it, add what you think should be added, give us ideas, suggest things that should be included, should not be included, and so that before the governor gets to the point where he tells us what it should look like, we'll have the people saying to him, here's what we think it should look like. And I think that was kind of the last comment I heard about your discussion here, is that sometimes we get elected and we think we have all the answers. We don't. And anyone who says to you, elect me, I know how to, no, I'm going to need your help to do my job. Anybody who is elected will need your help to do their job. And on this issue in particular, I think the voice of young people is going to be resounding, and we need to hear it. And so clearly there still are some people who are not there yet, and I get that. But for the people who are there and understand that, Colorado has got it, or Washington, most states that already have made this legal are majority Caucasian states. And that's okay. They don't have the same issues necessarily that we have in New York. New York is not majority Caucasian, particularly in our urban areas. So we've got to have the social justice piece. We've got to have to figure out the way how it's going to be regulated, and we also have to have the way to figure out how we're going to invest those dollars back into the communities that so desperately need it. 3506, that's the legislation. You can go on the state's website, you can pull the bill up in its entirety, and you can offer to me, and I look forward to it, any ideas, any suggestions that you may have on that topic. The bill has been introduced since 4 years ago. This is the closest it's ever gotten to really having a real conversation about it. There's only been 1 hearing in Buffalo and 2 in New York City in its entire 4-year period. So now we've got to step our game up. We've got to get more input. And I hope that you all will be willing to help with that. With that, I'll end and hope there will be questions later. Thank you very much.